World of Warcraft has been one of the most popular games since its release in 2004, even winning the Guinness World Record for the most critically acclaimed MMORPG, with a 91.89% ranking. At its peak in 2010, World of Warcraft reached 12 million subscribers. Millions of people have dedicated their life to this game, so much so that scientists and researchers can use player data to examine how people would react in the real world to certain situations. So what does this have to do with the coronavirus pandemic? Well, we have to take it back to 2005 to find out. On September 13th of 2005, a new raid was introduced called Zul Group. It was the first 20-man raid ever, and players had to travel into the jungles of Stranglethorn to defeat the boss, Blood God Hakar, the Soul Flayer. This raid became one of the most infamous in WoW history, and the reason for that is because of one specific mechanic of Hakar called Corrupted Blood. This was a contagious debuff that could affect a set number of players and was only countered by players spreading out and away from each other. You're probably already starting to see the similarities here. Corrupted Blood could be passed between any nearby characters and could kill lower level characters in a matter of seconds. High level characters were able to stay alive, and the debuff would only disappear after enough time had passed or if the character died. What made Corrupted Blood so infamous, you may ask? Well, it's because of one small programming error. You see, hunters and warlocks have pets in the game, and during the raid, those pets could also contract the Corrupted Blood, but the problem was that when characters dismissed their pets, those pets would retain any active debuffs when summoned again. Now, Corrupted Blood was only supposed to affect players within the raid, but because of this coding oversight, pets that were summoned outside of the raid were able to spread Corrupted Blood to other characters and even NPCs. And thus, an epidemic quickly spread through World of Warcraft. As the Corrupted Blood spread, the game servers were thrown into a panic. This later became known to the community as the Corrupted Blood incident. At the time, WoW had more than 2 million players worldwide, and they responded to the event in different ways. Some angrily called Blizzard, complaining about how their character died. Some abandoned servers until the outbreak was contained. And surprisingly, some even intentionally logged in just to see what was going on because they were curious, even though they were putting their characters at risk. This is when scientists started to take notice of the situation and realized that it would be one of the best ways to study human behavior during an epidemic, as the last major pandemic was the influenza outbreak in 1918, which killed up to 50 million people. A note on that, there have been other pandemics since. While they were still devastating, the death tolls are only around 1 to 2 million, which in comparison to the influenza outbreak is a small number. I also need to mention the HIV/AIDS crisis that started in 1981, which claimed over 36 million lives. However, due to rampant homophobia, the disease wasn't taken seriously, and therefore isn't a good measurement as to how the general population will act during pandemics. What made this interesting from a scientific viewpoint is that most characters behaved in a way you would expect of people in an outbreak like this. A couple notable epidemiologists were Rand Balicer, Eric Lofgren, and Nina Pfefferman, and they all studied player behavior and wrote papers that advocated for the idea of using video games in virtual worlds to predict how people will behave in an outbreak. Now let's look at the similarities between the Corrupted Blood incident and the COVID-19 pandemic. In one of the papers Balicer published, he said, "The role of an asymptomatic yet infective animal reservoir, for instance, is evident in avian influenza." This corresponds with the World Health Organization report, where they suggested that COVID-19 began in bats and ended up passing to humans through direct contact or through other animals. A lot of players in WoW acted as if their life was actually at risk. They fled cities to try and find somewhere safe, many of them moving to the countryside, and isolated themselves from others, just like the government-mandated quarantine procedures where people were told to stay inside their homes and not leave unless they absolutely had to. Many kept themselves from the world and only had contact through social media to try and prevent themselves from catching the disease or spreading it to others. There were conspiracy theories on the WoW forums, pondering whether Blizzard intentionally allowed Corrupted Blood to spread for some reason, perhaps as a publicity stunt. Unfortunately, there were a lot of conspiracies surrounding COVID-19 as well. Some believe the disease didn't actually exist and it was just a hoax made up for some reason. Or it was intentionally released as a bioweapon in order to disrupt the world's economy or thin the herd of a certain group of people. Many different governments were blamed for this, by the way, but there is no evidence to back any of this up. Another comparison is the fact that NPCs could get sick. They could pass the disease to other players, but they couldn't die themselves. So they were considered asymptomatic carriers. And obviously, during the pandemic, there were many people, even at early stages, who would leave the house unknowingly or not, spreading the disease to others because they were asymptomatic and they didn't appear sick, either because they thought it didn't matter or because their job forced them to go to work anyway. Some players would volunteer to redirect people away from places where the disease was spreading. Other characters in the game had healing abilities and would attempt to go out and try to save infected players, even though they were putting themselves at risk. These people are just like the healthcare workers we had during the pandemic, who would go into the hospitals every day to take care of those who caught the coronavirus, among other things, because they thought it was their duty and they put the needs of others above their own. In the game, there were trolls who would intentionally try to get other characters sick. While the idea of people deliberately spreading infectious diseases is worrisome, terrorism expert Stuart Gottlieb at Yale said, "Death in World of Warcraft is a nuisance at most," implying that this is still just a video game, even though it's one players can be heavily invested in. And that doesn't indicate those people would willfully go and get others sick in real life. Unfortunately, during the coronavirus, we got to see what that looked like firsthand. Although there were no large-scale reports of people trying to spread COVID-19 out of malice, there were still theories out there that having everyone get the virus was the best way for the world to get back to quote-unquote normal. Take Paul Alexander. The American Health and Human Services advisor at the time urged health officials to adopt a herd immunity approach to the pandemic. He said, "There is no other way. We need to establish herd, and it only comes about allowing the non-high-risk groups expose themselves to the virus, period. Infants, kids, teens, young people, young adults, middle-aged with no conditions, etc. have zero to little risk. So we use them to develop herd. We want them infected." This was wrong in a number of ways. Ethically, morally. But even coming at it from a logical scientific viewpoint, it was clear that Alexander didn't have a real idea on how herd immunity is supposed to work. Real herd immunity is when a large portion of the population is immune to a specific disease, which causes a virus or bacteria to dissipate because it has nowhere to go and can't latch on to any hosts. This in turn can help protect people who are immunocompromised because the disease has a smaller chance of reaching those individuals if the herd is protecting them. You do not need to intentionally infect yourself for herd immunity. Vaccines can help create the same effect if enough people are able and willing to get them. Even though Alexander might not have been intentionally trying to hurt people, there are still those who latch onto this idea as the best way to get the world back to normal, and if we had followed this plan, it could have been detrimental to people with unknown health conditions that COVID-19 would have immensely affected. The Corrupted Blood incident ended when Blizzard was forced to hard reset the game servers to before the Hakkar raid took place. This stopped the Corrupted Blood mechanic from spreading through the world and gave a fresh slate to characters who were affected. It's too bad that we don't have a rewind button that could take us back to late 2019. That could give a reset for millions of people who have been harmed by the novel coronavirus. There is a hint of irony, revisiting the Corrupted Blood epidemic now after seeing everything that's happened in our world in the last few years. Unfortunately, it seems as if we are left with more questions than answers. If we had paid more attention to the epidemiology reports of the past, could we have done anything to influence safer human behavior when the real world was struck with a rampaging disease? Perhaps if something like Corrupted Blood happened again, would players learn from what they went through in their lives to take safety precautions in-game? We may never know these answers, but what we can do is try to impart the knowledge we gained through the trauma and pain over the last couple years so that our descendants can be better prepared than we were if another pandemic strikes. Thanks for watching, hit the like button if you enjoyed this video, and subscribe if you want to see more content like this. What video should we make next? Let us know in the comments below and maybe you'll be featured in the next episode. We'll see you next time.